Hello friends, and welcome to the lecture on problems in enforcement of environmental legislation in India. Dear students, let me first of all give you a brief outline of what we are going to discuss today. In this lecture, we will understand about the insights regarding the environmental legislation and its functions. To understand the historical background of environmental legislation, to understand the need for legislation, to understand the role of people's participation in legislation, to know the difficulties in enforcement of environmental legislation. To begin with, let me give you a brief introduction of environmental legislation. Dear students, human society has progressed from hunting-gathering stage. Man has started altering the natural environment in the pursuit of creating an economic, social and cultural environment of this choice. This has resulted in the depletion of natural resources, degradation of land and pollution of water and air. Urbanization has also led to noise pollution, hazardous technology in chemical and nuclear power plants, storage and transportation of toxic radioactive materials and nuclear wastes has brought havoc and mass casualties in several parts of the world. In order to protect ourselves, the animal and plant life and the environment from destruction, numerous laws have been enacted at the national and international levels. Environmental laws and policy are based on the realization of mankind of the dire physical necessity to preserve invaluable and none too easily replenishable nature's gift to man. It is an instrument to protect and improve the environment and to control or prevent any act or omission polluting or likely to pollute the environment. Thus, environmental law may be defined as a collective term describing international treaties or conventions, statutes, regulations and common law or national legislation where applicable that operates to regulate the interaction of humanity and the natural environment towards the purpose of reducing the impacts of human activity. It was only after the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment in 1972 that the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974 came into existence. Dear students, under this act, the Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Boards were created to regulate and control pollution through issuing of permits or consent for discharging trade effluents, setting standard for emission and effluents, and imposing penalty for violation of provisions of acts. The study of environmental law is not confined to a study of the law which is written down in legislation, so called black letter law, but it is also concerned with how law is used to achieve the objectives of the key environmental stakeholders, the regulators, the regulated, especially the businesses, central government, local government, industry association, pressure groups, local amenity societies and the public. The government and its agency issue policy documents to public officials, and the public in the form of official guidance in a never-ending stream of white papers, green papers, consultation documents, guidance notes and circulars. Although this guidance is not law, it is nevertheless important because it guides how the regulators, such as the Environment Agency, will use the law to achieve the regulator's statutory objectives. Dear students, during the 3 decades since the emergence of ecological degradation as an issue of great global concern, environmental laws has been the primary mechanism used to promote natural resource conservation, pollution control, and other forms of environmental protection. The realm of international law has grown to encompass hundreds of international and regional treaties, thousands of national laws, and countless administrative regulations promulgated by more than 180 states and multilateral organizations such as the United Nations agencies and international development banks. Every new environmental treaty is preceded by a multitude of conferences, backdoor negotiations, position papers drafted by government officials and affected interest groups, intensive lobbying by many governments, multilateral organizations, environmental NGOs, scientists, trade groups, and industry representatives, and also anyone else who has a stake in the outcome. Every ratified treaty is then followed by the conferences of the parties, reports by the Secretariat, intergovernment panels, and advisory committee meetings, and the same kinds of active lobbying efforts that permeate international environmental lawmaking processes. By any measure of diplomatic and legal activity, the field of international environmental law has experienced remarkable growth and high salience since the 1972 Stockholm Declaration on the Human Environment. Dear students, now we will be discussing about the functions of environmental law. Much of the environmental law concerns the regulation of polluting emissions discharged into 3 environmental media, that's air, water, and the land. The primary function of environmental law is not to eliminate pollution except in the case of a relatively few highly toxic pollutants, but to balance the polluting emissions generated by economic activity against the demands of society for a tolerably healthy environment. Polluting emissions must therefore be set in most cases by government or its regulators at levels which are acceptable to its major stakeholders, regulated businesses, and the public. This balancing task is performed on the behalf of government by regulatory agencies such as the Environment Agency and the local authorities. Environmental law also has subsidiary preventive, remedial, that's cleanup, and the compensatory functions. Also, environmental law violators are punished with criminal fines, probation, jail time, or a combination of these punishments according to the laws that are more feasible. While jail time may be the most formidable punishment for individuals who commit environmental crimes, fines are intended to deter large corporations from violating environmental laws and regulations. Without the threat of heavy monetary punishment, some corporations might find that non-compliance is more cost effective than obeying the law. Environmental crime fines are meant to offset the financial allure of activities such as illegal dumping and thus environmental justice is achieved. Environmental justice is therefore defined as a fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin or income with respect to the development, implementation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations and policies. Fair treatment means that no group of people, including a racial, ethnic or socio-economic group, should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal and commercial operations or the execution of federal, state, local and tribal programs or policies. Now, dear students, we will discuss the historical background of these legislations. The recognition that the natural environment was fragile and in need of special legal protections, the translation of that recognition into legal structures and the development of those structures into a large body of environmental law did not occur until about the 1960s. At that time, numerous influences, including a growing awareness of the unity and fragility of the biosphere following mankind's first steps into outer space, increased public awareness over the impact of industrial activity on natural resources and human health. The increasing strength of the regulatory state and more broadly the advent and success of environmentalism as a political movement coalesced to produce a huge new body of a law in a relatively shorter period of time. While the modern history of environmental law is one of the continuing controversy by the end of the 20th century, environmental law had been established as a component of the legal landscape in all developed nations of the world. Many developing ones and the larger project of environmental law. Now, we will be talking about the need for legislation and its enforcement. Dear students, since the 1970s, only the easy victories have been won. Environmental pollution problems were obvious, and by implementing technical solutions and regulatory mandates and by focusing on end of the pipe pollution from large industrial and municipal sources, some improvements were achieved. Questions of loss of biodiversity etc. do not rank high on political agendas, since they do not directly affect the human survival. New problems such as the climate change and urban environmental problems are emerging, and old problems such as the nature protection have not yet been solved. Overall, the state of the environment is deteriorating, especially in the field of soil, waste and water policy. We face new problems arising from the non-point sources, the loss of biological diversity, the increasing rate of species extinction, depletion of the ozone layer, disposal of toxic and nuclear wastes in the vulnerable areas of the planet, the management of computer trash, the loss of forests and the arable soil at an alarming rate, the fight against global climate change, which are much more difficult to monitor and to manage. The chance of serious accidents that could wipe out human, animal and plant life and destroy the environment has steadily increased. An urgent need for the collaborative action on the global level has long been felt in 1972. In 1972, representatives of 113 world governments assembled in Stockholm to participate in the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. The Stockholm Conference proclaimed that The protection and improvement of human environment is a major issue which affects the well-being of people and economic development throughout the world. And it is the duty of all governments and people to exert common effort for the preservation and improvement of human environment for the benefit of all people and their posterity. Many countries have therefore introduced control mechanisms to deter and punish the enterprise violating the environment. They have enacted special criminal laws or amended their penal codes by creating new criminal laws. India was the first country to impose a constitutional obligation on the state and citizens to protect and improve the environment as one of the primary duties. Article 48A of the Indian Constitution provides, the state shall endeavour to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard forests and wildlife of the country. While as the Article 51A provides that it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. Dear students, now we will be discussing the importance of enforcement. Enforcement of the regulations is important for the following reasons. First, to limit environmental damage and to ensure restoration to the original state. Second, to prevent recurrence, whether by the same party or others. Third, to cancel out any unfair advantage that the offender may have enjoyed. Fourth, to affirm norms established in the interest of the environment or public health. The possibility of government control by means of quantified standards, etc. The students' enforcement action is primarily concerned with repair, deterrence and sanction. In other words, it aims to restore the environmental situations to its prior state, to discourage the offender and others from committing offences in future, and to penalize the offender. In addition, consistent enforcement action is necessary in the interest of legal certainty, justice, equality of treatment and credibility. Now, we will be talking about environmental law violations. The students' environmental crime refers to the violation of laws intended to protect the environment and human health. These laws govern air and water quality and dictate the ways in which the disposal of waste and hazardous materials can legally take place. At federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency EPA has enforcement authority over environmental law violation. There are many types of the environmental crimes. Environmental crime covers a wide range of violations that result in harm befalling the environment and human life, from errors at the administrative or record keeping level to the actual illegal dumping of pollutants into the environment. Environmental crimes may include but are not limited to the following, like littering, improper waste disposal, oil spills, destruction of wetlands, dumping into oceans, streams, lakes or rivers, improperly handling pesticides or other toxic chemicals, burning garbage, improperly removing and disposal of asbestos, falsifying lab data pertaining to environmental regulations, smuggling certain chemicals such as CFC refrigerators, bribing government officials, committing fraud related to environmental crime. Now, dear students, we will be trying to get an insight into the role of people's participation in legislation and environmental protection. In order to instill the consciousness of environment amongst the people, the 42nd Amendment of the Indian Constitution has imposed fundamental duties like Article 51AG to every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment. Since our country is highly populated, it is difficult to implement environmental laws without the people's participation. Importance of people's participation has been recognized in the form of NGOs. The importance of the public and NGOs involvement for environmental protection has very much highlighted in the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNICED, which is properly known as Rio Conference in 1992. In our country, the number of voluntary agencies, community groups, academic societies, corporate entities like NGOs working for environment has increased significantly in the last few years. This is mainly due to the growing awareness of the environmental degradation and its importance for mankind. At present, there are more than 1,000 NGOs working in different parts of the country for the welfare of the environment. The National Environmental Awareness campaigns promoted by the Ministry of Environment and Forests have successfully encouraged many NGOs development, tribal welfare, appropriate technology, etc., as there is a direct link between environmental protection and human welfare. All the NGOs with main objective and activities related to environment are to promote the environmental education and awareness through organization of film shows, workshops, seminars, training programs, documentary films, especially for the students to collect, compile and disseminate data related to environment, or to aware the public and authorities about the problem areas and extent of environmental degradation, including harm to the public health and other resources, affection of wildlife and conducting research related to the protection of environment. Dear students, we will also highlight here some of the difficulties in enforcement of environment legislation. Despite all the legislative activity, the state of the environment in India continues to be gloomy. The rivers and the lakes continue to be choked with sewage and industrial waste. The air quality in some major cities has gained the dubious distinction of being worse than that of the American cities like Chicago and New York. Although the legislative measures taken and the administrative setup are sufficiently indicative of the government's concern, the implementation does not reflect a sound appreciation of the issue involved in eco-management and development. Environment is a resource, perhaps the most precious of all the earth's resources. The measures adopted by the government until now do not reveal an equal emphasis on the management and development aspects of this vital resource. Often these measures reflected a fire brigade approach rushing to the spot of fire after it breaks out, and ounce of the prevention in the field of the environment is literally worth a gallon of cure. Poverty and environmental degradation are often bound together in a mutually reinforcing cycle, and thus human rights abuses related to poverty can be both cause and effects of environmental problems. The NEPAD Environmental Action Plan has identified poverty as the main cause and consequence of man-made environmental degradation and resource depletion. Dear students, there are many drawbacks in environmental legislations. There are a number of important environmental laws in the form of acts for safeguarding our environmental quality. But in spite of these acts, we find that we are not able to achieve the target of bringing 33% of our land cover under forests. Still, we are losing our wildlife. The rivers have turned into open sewers in many places, and the air in our big cities is badly polluted. Legislation is often not perfect, and the status of environment shows that there are drawbacks in environmental legislations. Some of the important issues related to our acts. Drawbacks of Wildlife Protection Act 1972. It seems that as if the act has been enacted just as the fallout of Stockholm Conference held in 1972, and it has not included any locally involved conservation measures. The ownership certificates for the animal articles like tiger, leopard, chickens, etc. are permissible, which very often serve as a tool for illegal trading. The wildlife traders in Jammu and Kashmir also easily get the illegal furs and chicken from other states, which after making caps, belts, etc. are sold or smuggled to other countries. Moreover, hunting and trading of several endangered species prohibited in other states are allowed in Jammu and Kashmir, thereby opening avenues for illegal trading in such animals and articles. The offender of the act is not subject to very harsh penalties. It is just up to 3 years imprisonment or a fine of about 25,000 or both. Then the drawbacks of the Forest Conservation Act 1980. Forests constitute a vital resource of the nation. It is a scientifically established fact that the forest cover should be at least 1/3 of the land area for a healthy state of environment. Vegetation generates oxygen, trees hold the soil together, and in India the forest provide livelihood to millions of tribals and villagers living in and around forests. Experts and the mass media have brought to the attention of the decision makers and the public at large the fact that the forest cover of the country has been rapidly shrinking. Some estimates put the present coverage at not more than 12% of the land area. Fuel-starved villagers, greedy forest contractors, and corrupt officials are the prone culprits. Dear students, this act has inherited the exploitative and consumerist elements from the forest laws of British period. It has just transferred the powers from state to center to decide the conservation of reserve forest lands to non-forest areas. Thus, power has been centralized at the top. At the same time, the local communities have been completely kept out from the decision making processes regarding the nature of the use of forest area. Very often, the tribals who lived in the forest and were totally dependent on the forest retaliate when stopped from taking any resources from there and start criminal activities including smuggling, killing, etc. The act has failed to attract public support because it has infringed upon the human rights of the poor native people. They argue that the law is concerned about protecting the trees, birds and animals, but is treating the poor people as marginal. Very poor community participation in the Act remains one of the major drawbacks that affect proper execution of the Act. The forest dwelling tribal communities have a rich knowledge about the forest resources, their importance and conservation, but their role and contribution is neither acknowledged nor honored. Dear students, efforts are now being made to make up for the gaps in laws by introducing the principles of a public trust or human rights protection. Now, the drawbacks of the pollution related acts. The power and the authority has been given to central government with little delegation of power to state governments. Excessive centralization very often hinders efficient execution of the provision of the acts in the states. Illegal mining is taking in many forest areas. In Rajasthan alone, about 14,000 cases of illegal mining have been reported. It becomes more difficult to check such activities at a central level. The provision of the penalties in the Act is very insignificant as compared to the damage caused by the big industries due to pollution. The penalty is much less than the cost of treatment or pollution control equipment. This always gives a loose rope to the industries. This Act has not included the right to information for the citizens. This greatly restricts the involvement or participation of the general public. The Environment Protection Act 1986, regarded as an umbrella act encompassing the earlier two acts, often seems superfluous due to overlapping areas of jurisdiction. For instance, section 24(2) of the new Act has made a provision that if the offender is punishable under the other acts like Water Act or Air Act also, then he may be considered under their provisions. So, interestingly, the penalty under the older two acts is much lighter than the new Act. So, the offender easily gets away with a lighter punishment. Similarly, under section 19, a person cannot directly file a petition in the court on a question of environment and has to give a notice of minimum 60 days to the central government. In case no action is taken by the latter, then alone he can file a petition which certainly delays the remedial action. Litigation, particularly related to environment, is very expensive, tedious and difficult since it involves expert testimony, technical knowledge of the issue and terminologies, technical understanding of the unit processes, lengthy prosecutions, etc. The state boards were often lack adequate funds and expertise to pursue their objectives. A tendency to seek exercise to install effluent treatment plant (ETP) or air pollution control devices, and sometimes they have no other option but to close the unit. The Act should make some provisions for subsidies for installing treatment plants or common effluent treatment plants for several small units. The pollution control laws are not backed by sound policy pronouncements or guiding principles. Political appointee usually occupies the position of the chairman of the boards. Hence, it is difficult to keep political interference at bay. The policy statement of the Ministry of Environment and Forest 1992 of involving public in decision making and the facilitating public monitoring of the environmental issues has mostly remained on paper. Environmental policies and laws need to be aimed at democratic decentralization of the power, community-state partnership, administration transparency and accountability, and more stringent penalties to the offender. There is also a need for environmental law education and capacity building in environmental issues for managers. Finally, we can sum up the problems in enforcement of the environmental laws in the following points: corruption, poverty, lack of environmental awareness, inefficient laws, controversy between judiciary and executive, irregular monitoring of the thrust areas, materialistic approach of the people, improper execution of the laws, strengthening of state and central pollution control boards, proper coordination between the pollution control boards and other law making agencies, inefficient work culture in the societies, political pressures. So, development has paved the path for the rise in the level of standard of living, but it has simultaneously led to serious environmental disaster because of more materialism associated with the development. Dear students, the wisdom lies in maintaining a balance between our needs and supplies so that the delicate ecological balance is not disrupted. Everyone needs to understand it because environment belongs to the all and every individual matters when it comes to the conservation and protection of the environment. In the end, we can conclude by remembering the fact that development has paved the path for the rise in the level of standard of living, but it has simultaneously led to a serious environmental disaster because of more materialism associated with the development. The wisdom lies in maintaining a balance between our needs and supplies so that the delicate ecological balance is not disrupted. Everyone needs to understand it because environment belongs to all and every individual matters when it comes to conservation and protection of environment. With this, we conclude today's lecture. Thank you.